I've been binging some old films lately from the 30s and 40s, and I discovered some non-monogamous gems that I thought you might appreciate. So today I'm going to be talking about three different films. I'm No Angel from 1933, Designed for Living, also from 1933, and The Talk of the Town from 1942. They're all black and white films, relatively short, 1.5 hours, a pretty classic film length back then, but really, really short compared to the films we have now. And they're all pretty entertaining. And it really shows how social attitudes towards sex and sexuality have evolved over time and kind of just swung from one end of the pendulum to the other. Because, yeah, some of the stuff that was portrayed back then was pretty progressive, even for now. I'll start with Designed for Living, which stars Frederick March, Gary Cooper, and Miriam Hopkins. And the film is basically about a woman who's in love with two men who are in love with her, and she can't pick between them, so she chooses both. The start of the film reminded me a little bit of Challenges, which I also reviewed a couple months back, where basically these two men are just falling over their feet to try and impress this girl, and they don't mind that they're both chasing her at the same time because they're just so focused on getting her attention. There really isn't that much of competitive energy between them at the start, but the competitiveness is introduced, perhaps due to just societal attitudes and the people around them. The dialogue's pretty funny, Miriam's character is clearly enjoying the attention, and basically at one point they decide to settle down and the three of them live together, but with the understanding that she's not going to be having sex with either of them, and they have a gentleman's agreement so as to prevent jealousy. I found this pretty hilarious as a kind of skirting around like how scandalous that would have been to even imply that she was having sex with both of them at the same time. And so, just introducing this plotline of let's agree that I'm gonna be your muse, but we're not gonna have sex, so no one's gonna get upset. Obviously, this gentleman's agreement doesn't last, and the drama between them becomes too much for the women to bear. And so she actually ends up marrying her employer, who's this random dude called Max, who runs the advertising company that she works for, but she's clearly not in love with him. And you can tell she's like constantly lusting after the two men, even while she's like literally about to be married to her husband. Anyway, the film ends when her husband hosts a party for a bunch of guests, and her two former lovers gatecrash the party and end up like finding her in the bedroom, and they're like talking and laughing in the bed. And then they get discovered, and she decides to run off with the two of them, and they decide to live together again as a three. And the final shot in the film is the three of them sat together in the taxi with her in the middle, and she kisses one of them, she kisses the other, and, it's a happily ever after. So, pretty radical for the time. I particularly enjoyed Miriam Hopkins' character because she is unusually sexually liberated, very independent, clearly isn't just kind of written for the two men to fall in love with as a kind of plot device kind of thing. Like, she has her own desires and thoughts and opinions. She at one point has a scene where like she kind of describes like a different orgasm she has with the two men, which I found really wild. And she's very interested in keeping the peace between the two men as well, like in a way that, just going to such extreme lengths to ensure that these men don't like lose their friendship with each other, I thought was really sweet. Kind of the opposite of what happened with Challenges. It's quite a horny film, although I will say I wish there was a little bit more homoeroticism between the men. I think that was what it was missing. There's a bit more of that in The Talk of the Town, but I'll get to that later. The next film is I'm No Angel, also from 1933, starring Mae West. This is an incredibly funny film. I think it was also written by Mae West, and she stars in it. Iconic. You may know this film by the iconic line that Mae West says at one point in the film: "When I'm good, I'm very, very good, but when I'm bad, I'm better." And it's basically about this woman who is so universally desirable that like on her vanity mirror, she's got these like tiny little pictures of all the men that she's been with a statue of an animal that she feels represents them next to them. Like she's got like a whole stack of these photos, and she's just like, oh, this lover gave me this necklace and that lover did this thing. And this is just kind of portrayed as like humorous and there's nothing wrong with it. Like she's clearly like very promiscuous and adventurous and just loves dating. The plot itself is quite ridiculous. Like basically we see her like flirting and having dalliances with like a bunch of guys, and then like towards the end of the film she meets a guy who she wants to marry, but then he like there's a misunderstanding where he finds like a former lover of hers in her apartment, and so he breaks off the engagement. She decides to sue him, and then in court she charms everyone, including the judge and the entire jury. Like all of them are like just in love with her, and basically ends up winning the court case. He gives her like a huge settlement sum, but she decides to tear up the check and they reconcile and presumably get married. At various points, I wasn't really sure like where this film was going, who the main characters are supposed to be, like whether this is the ending or whether there's more to come. Like that was a little bit confusing. The pacing of it was a bit off, but I will say, of the three films I'm talking about today, this was by far the funniest. Mae West just has like so many zingers happening like every, 2 to 3 minutes. Whether it's just like musings that she's making about life, or like comments that she's making about men, or just like funny jokes just peppered throughout the film. So I still think this is worth a watch despite like the slightly confusing pacing. And it's lovely to see like a woman just writing a story for herself where she's like having people falling for her left and right, and she's like making flirtatious jokes constantly. Just a delight to watch, honestly. And also I guess the symbolism of her winning the court case and just being like, there's nothing wrong with me being promiscuous, I'm still a good person, and here is all the proof, and I'm so charismatic that I should absolutely get all this money. Iconic. Also, Cary Grant plays the man that she eventually marries, and he is hot. I can see why so many people lusted after this man back then, because holy shit. His acting was a bit lackluster in the film though, I will say, like their chemistry wasn't all that, but it's saved by Mae West just being absolutely hilarious throughout. Oh, and another thing I really enjoyed about the film, the outfits. Like every single scene that Mae West appears in, she's in the most ludicrous, camp, loud outfit, and she looks fantastic in every single one of them. So yeah, overall really enjoyed another really good pre-code film that was very progressive for its time. The final film is The Talk of the Town from 1942, which I would say is probably plot-wise the most complex one and also the most interesting one. Cary Grant's character is falsely accused of murder and arson, and he escapes from prison during the trial to hide out at an old schoolmate friend's of his. But while he's hiding out there, this lady has a lodger who's going to be coming to stay with her for the summer, and he's this law professor who's trying to write a book. So at some point the two men meet each other and she introduces the escaped convict as her gardener. There are various hijinks where they get very, very close to revealing that he's like the escaped convict. That's been all over the news, but they manage to narrowly avoid it every single time. Anyway, the two men develop a rapport. They're constantly talking about philosophy of the law and stuff like that. Like the men are constantly trading compliments with each other, and like one of them like it gets like a manicure in one scene, and another one is in like a big frilly apron cooking a meal. The lawyer ends up getting involved in the escaped convict's case because basically he was accused of like murdering a foreman through a fire in like the factory that he was working at, and so like the lawyer goes undercover. He ends up trying to romance the supposedly dead foreman's girlfriend and finds out that the foreman is still alive, so he hasn't been murdered. They capture the guy, they try and bring him to trial, and he escapes, etc. But eventually the convict's name is cleared, and for his noble actions, the lawyer guy is appointed as a Supreme Court judge. Throughout all this, there are various flirtations between like the woman and the two men that she's with, and also a lot of homoerotic tension between the two men. Like, they have, like, a lot of deep conversations. They constantly really enjoy each other's company. They're constantly looking out for each other. But it's the ending of this film that I found particularly interesting. After the law professor guy becomes a Supreme Court judge, him and the woman have a conversation in his, like, office or whatever, where he's talking about how all his dreams have been realized and he's so happy and successful, and all he wants is for her and the other guy to be happy. And then they kiss. So you think like, oh, okay, so they got something going on. But then essentially later on in a scene, her and the judge share quite a flirtatious look, which makes the other guy think that like they're together now. And so he leaves, she runs after him, and then they agree to get married. So I'm like, did the judge guy essentially go, well, I'm a judge now, I've got everything that I want, you two should be happy, so I love you and I want you to get married to that other guy that I really care for? I think is essentially what happened. I think the title, The Talk of the Town, really does this film a disservice. I don't know what I would call it, but it doesn't really fully encapsulate what happens in this film, because it's like a comedy, it's a drama, it's a thriller, and like a romance all at the same time. But like, I would say the relationship between the two men is developed a lot more than their respective relationships with the woman. But I would say this film is a really good example of compersion. Like, both of these men really enjoy watching the other with a woman that they both love, and there isn't any jealousy or weird fighting between them. They just kind of very happily coexist in this home. Also, the lady is badass. Like, at one point she's hitting cops over the head with a wrench. Of the three films, I would say I enjoyed watching The Talk of the Town the most. Like I said, it's the one with the most complex plot, with a lot more going on. I think I'm No Angel is a fun one to watch if you're drunk, because Mae West is just so funny. And Design for Living is just really sweet. I have a Letterboxd account and I've currently made a list of films containing polyamory in them. It's a slowly growing list. I'm adding titles to it as I go, and I'm going to be watching more and more films that I can hopefully recommend to you. And if there are any new films or TV shows or media coming out featuring polyamory, please let me know so I can review them here. Happy to watch and recommend them, or watch them so that you don't have to. But these three films reminded me that it's occasionally quite fun to dive into the past and see what material is there as well, because what you find may surprise you. Anyway, let me know if you've seen these films and enjoyed them, or watch them after this video and let me know what you think about them. Pretty sure Design for Living is available for free on YouTube. The other ones, I'm sure you can find them online. There are methods. Anyway, thank you for watching to the end, and I will see you next time.